We now interrupt this program for a special Hollaback News Report 317.
Mr. Shakespeare, what do you feel was the biggest difference between your character choices and Mr. Book's choices? Who had a major change, and why did you change that person from the earlier interpretation?
By compressing thy poem, thy story creates dramatic emotions throughout thy which is not found in thy poem. Compressing thy poem in only 4 days truly conveys and allows thou to understand the spontaneous love that occurred between Romeo and Juliet. Thy play would have been too long for thy poem's contents. So again, thou warped ill-natured giglet, I must have condensed the poem. Romeo could not have been walking by Juliet's house for weeks. It would have been very boring to the audience.
Mr. Shakespeare, why did you cut out a large part of the violence and darker moments? For example, the fight scene between Romeus and Tybalt.
In thy play, Sir Romeo had a great exchange because I wanted to be romantic and not be violent, and suitable for all audiences, all bushwhackers of thy stupidity. I feel that thy character of Sir Romeo was the biggest difference, since with Romeus 'twas a lion wild that rampeth on his rage.
This interview is brought to you by Platypi. Platypi, the mammal that lays eggs.
Mr. Shakespeare, could you describe one aspect of a scene that you left in place and why you chose to do so?
More of thy darker scenes, such as thy skirmish, would have been very hard to perform on a stage with thy stage folk, as they are great nimwits. Also, I did not want Romeo to be thought of as a ruthless murderer. Lastly, as a play, thy audience would not want thy play to be so horrifying. It just doesn't fit the plot. Thy reason for doing such a thing as 'twas because I wanted thy plot and story and whole to be not as darketh, focusing more on thy love of thy two subjects, Romeo and Juliet, you dumb fairy bushwhacker.
Mr. Shakespeare, why in your version is Romeus, or Romeo, not described as such a rageful character that Mr. Book described him as in his poem?
This adds to thy irony of a Capulet marrying a Montague, since with Romeo, a moral Montague is a known bloody wretched slave, a high-end Capulet, and the notorious T.Y. Bull.
The scene where Romeus slayed thy nematode Tybalt.
I left the scene in place to add the conflict between thy Capulets and thy Montagues. Back to one of thy questions I answered earlier, thou dirty privy of a woman. My intention for thy character of Romeo 'twas not to be like a forest boar, but a respectable man who is more sensible than an animal. Thy play that I wrote, 'twas meant for Romeo to be a man of respect, of honor, who his heart was with Juliet. Where this is thy poem, would not be possible to act out on stage. 'Twas merely a description of Romeo I did not believe was accurate.
Mr. Shakespeare, why did you choose to make this poem into a play?
I made thy poem into a play because thy plot could be made into a marvelous theater performance. There are a lot of entertaining ideas from thy poem, such as quarreling between characters. These suspenseful acts are just some of the howling moments the poor fish audience could experience throughout thy masterpiece.